Hello again, wine lovers. Welcome to our channel Uncorked. My name is Roland Zimmerman, and I'm here today to talk to you about how to read a wine label. Stick around, grab yourself a glass, and if you need them, grab these guys, and we'll get right to it. Here we go. So, before we get into the really confusing components of labels, we're going to cover some of the universal truths about wine labels that you will find everywhere in the world. We'll start off with number one, and that is the volume. This will be listed on every bottle somewhere. Second most important thing is the percentage of alcohol. You'll also find this somewhere on the label. Maybe not on the principal display, possibly on the back. Also, not to forget is the name of the producer, in this case, King's Court Estate Winery. And finally, the country of origin, in this case, Canada. It is also imperative, or it will absolutely be listed, is the actual generic name of the product. You will find this somewhere on the label. It has to be. And that, in this case, is red wine. Now that's the basics. That's pretty straightforward in terms of labels. After that, things get a little bit more confusing. We'll start off with North American wine labels and then talk a little bit about European wine labels. With the North American wine labels, here's how you can tell what's in the bottle. Usually, the naming system is that the variety is listed on the label. In this case, it's Cabernet Franc, and that is usually in very large lettering. It's very easy to determine. It's very easy to see when you are looking for a specific variety. Now, why that's important is because most consumers know varieties have certain flavors or pair well with certain foods. Check out some of our previous videos. We've talked about some of the wines that really do pair well that we grow here. That isn't, unfortunately, always on the label. Sometimes in North American wine labeling nomenclature, we may put a brand name on it or a blended name on it. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't tell you an awful lot about what's in the bottle, but you can kind of infer what it is. I'll give you an example. Our Black Knight red wine. It is a blend of 5 different varieties, but we do list those on the back of the label. So we do kind of give the consumer that bit of information. Additionally, a lot of these producers in North America actually have websites, so you can research what their actual grapes are in the actual bottle prior to purchasing, usually on your tablet or your smartphone. The next thing that may or may not be on a North American label is the level of sweetness. Now, this, in this case, in the Cabernet Franc here that I have with me, we don't actually have it listed on the label. And that is for the simple reason that it's inferred that a red wine is normally dry. Now, we do also make a sweet red wine, so not to confuse you any further, but that is actually listed as a sweet wine. If you don't see a specific sweetness descriptor on the actual label, you can almost assume that it is a dry wine. This, however, is not the case for sparkling wines. Sparkling wines actually have regulated sweetness terms that must appear on the label by law. So there will be anything from brut all the way to sweet, brut being dry. Yes, it's the way the nomenclature is with sparkling wines. The next one that usually is very hard to infer from a label is the quality of the wine. And a tip is that the quality is usually understood by the price you pay. Obviously, the higher the price is the thought, then higher the quality. That should hold true in the majority of your wine purchases. However, that isn't always the case, and unfortunately, there is no hard and fast rule on how to determine that by the label. There are, in some cases, in some regions, such as Ontario, appellations. This gives you a bit of a guidepost in terms of the quality of the wine. The VQA Niagara Peninsula is an example of a an appellation or an area where the grapes are grown, and of a certain minimum quality at the time of harvest. This isn't the case throughout North America, as some North American regions are still relatively young, and by that I mean less than 30 to 40 years of vine production, and they're still working out some of the details in terms of how to market their particular products. The final one is oftentimes people get confused by the alcohol volume on the actual label. Now, this is a percentage of alcohol that each 1 liter of wine would contain. So if in the case of the example I was showing you earlier, the 13% alcohol means that of the total volume, 13% of it is actual ethyl alcohol. So that is basically covering, sort of giving you a bit of a quick spreadsheet on how to quickly cover some of the North American labels. Getting to the European labels. Why are they so hard to understand? Yeah, centuries of winemaking is, I guess, the best answer that I can provide. There isn't really an easy or hard and fast rule to understand European wines. They have tried over the last few decades to simplify this. I'll show you here a perfect slide. This is the Italian version. It's how they've done their pyramid of quality of wine. The docg, that term on the top of the pyramid, that actually has very restrictive and very tough rules in order for a wine to be qualified or classified as that particular origin. Now, you will see that term, the docg, those letters, you will see on the label for a wine that has actually achieved those minimum standards. And of course, as you go down this pyramid, the standards become not as strict, or not necessarily bad, but the effort and the amount of control on the particular product to produce it becomes lesser and lesser, and therefore the costs also go lesser and lesser. The next one that I wanted to quickly touch on is the French system. Now, the French have, nationally speaking, a very, very simplified system, but in regional areas it is extremely complex. There's no easy or fast rule to explain it, but it's the image that you have up on your screen right here is an oversimplification. You have the AOC, or Appellation d'origine contrôlée, the IGP, Indication géographique protégée, and finally Vin de France. So these are the 3 stages, versus the Italians have the 4. I'm not going to touch too much on to the Spanish or the other large European wine producing countries, as they have very similar ideals and very similar systems that they have incorporated over the years. But again, as with the Italians, the French have that top of their pyramid is the highest quality possible that you can achieve in France. That is further segmented in certain regions, such as Bordeaux or Burgundy, into even greater segments of higher quality the higher up you go that pyramid. That's not depicted on this image because we're trying to keep it really as simple as possible. But you can infer that a French wine that has an AOC lettering on it will definitely be of a higher quality than an IGP or a Vin de France. And again, it's the same as with the Italians. The Vin de France doesn't mean that it isn't drinkable. It just means that it's not meant to be the everyday or exceptionally good wine. Now, to really turn all of that on its head, because the Italians and the French and the Spanish and all the Europeans have very actively been promoting or trying to get into the North American wine market, they have adopted some of the labeling nomenclature that we use in North America for some of the French wines. Now, this throws the French rules completely into a tailspin, or even the Italian rules, the European rules, into a complete tailspin, because they can't call a wine a Merlot unless it's a Vin de France. So it has to technically be considered to be the lowest quality level in terms of the French regulations to be able to use the name Merlot. Same with the Italians, same with the Spanish. Doesn't matter which country you're in, that's how it basically works. So if you see a Merlot from France, and it says Vin de France, that does not mean it is a bad wine. Rather, the contrary, it might actually be something brand new and so out of their frame of reference that the only way the producer could market it correctly would be to call it by the varietal name. Or it might be the case that that variety isn't normally grown in that specific region in either France or Italy. So therefore, it doesn't fall under the classification system for specific appellations that they have. That, ladies and gentlemen, is wine labels in a nutshell. Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate you dropping us a couple likes, and we'd love to hear your comments. Look forward to speaking with you again soon. Stay safe.